It's a common saying that you don't recognize a dream until it becomes a nightmare. That was my life, or my perception of it, anyhow. I had a successful business that I started from scratch, a large home that exuded prosperity, and Emma, the lady I believed to be my soulmate. I had everything I could possibly want. Gorgeous, astute, and enthralling, or she was anyhow. Things have changed of late. Emma was no longer the same. Initially, I attempted to attribute it to work-related stress, or even to our marriage's developmental stages. So individuals get preoccupied. It's true that life becomes difficult. However, it was more than simply the routine. She had been aloof, even frigid. The late evenings we used to spend together were now either spent with friends or on enigmatic work trips that never seemed to finish. I wanted to brush it off and think that everything was still all right. However, uncertainty tore at me like an itch that wouldn't go away. There were far too many insignificant details. When I questioned her about her day, she would laugh too artificially and constantly had her phone facing down. And those travels for work. She would return home with the identical, little-used bag that she had left. Not only did her scent continue to linger, but it also had a sickly stench. I'd see her sneaking glances at her phone, a glint of shame flashing over her face as she assumed I wasn't watching. Every time, my stomach twisted, but I wasn't prepared to face her. Not quite yet. Rather, I assumed the part of the unaware spouse, allowing the uncertainty to grow until I reached my breaking point. I made the choice that would alter everything at that point. I followed her one evening after she departed for one of her many business meals. It was only to calm my anxiety, I assured myself, in order to demonstrate my paranoia. But I knew in my heart, I had no doubt that what I was about to discover would upend all I believed to be true. I was correct, too. Silently, I trailed behind her, my fists clenching the driving wheel until my knuckles became white. She was said to be meeting with a customer downtown, but as she kissed me goodbye, I could tell by the tone of her voice that this was not a client appointment. Not even near. She avoided going downtown. Rather, she took a car to a peaceful area of the city, off the usual route, the type of location you go to avoid being discovered. With each curve she took, my heart hammered even harder. I had the impression that I was already preparing myself for what I was going to see. She approached a modest, unassuming eatery resembling one with cozy seats and low lighting. Gasping for air, I saw her enter the house as I parked down the street. With a racing mind, I waited. I was struggling with the tiny part of me that thought this was all just a big mistake. However, I later saw him. Mark. The moment he got out of his car and approached her as though he was her owner, I could not forget the name. There, in the open, he gave her a kiss as if they were the happiest people in the world. Their hands caressed each other in a way that made my stomach turn as they laughed. I watched from where I sat. I had the impression that a vice was crushing my heart. However, something odd occurred at that same time. I was at peace, not angry. A quiet as frigid and unsettling as the eye of a storm. It seemed like a light bulb went out in me when I saw them together. They were sneaking around behind my back, thinking they were cunning. They believed they could get the better of me. However, I refused to be the idiot in this tale. I gave them their space. I gave them freedom to enjoy their private little universe because I knew that eventually I would rip it apart piece by piece. It would not be fast, though. No, speed was too simple. Overly considerate. I wanted the anguish I was experiencing to be intensified for them. So I grinned as I sat there in the dark, since I was fully aware of the method I would use to force them both to pay. As I drove home, the communications lingered with me. It was nearly too intense. The majority of individuals would have charged into the restaurant in a fit of wrath, challenged them, and perhaps even delivered a few punches. I wasn't most people, though. I want no drama. I did not want a debate that would allow them to further twist the knife or defend their treachery. I desired to be in charge. I wanted my retaliation to be deadly, slow, and exact. As you can see, they were ignorant. Emma had easily forgotten my genius-level knowledge in technology. My company was founded on technologies that most people would never comprehend. I performed it well. No, I was the greatest at it. And now I was going to utilize every bit of my knowledge to make the worst possible nightmare out of their lives. Access was the first step. It was not as difficult to obtain as you may assume. I'd configure every network in our houses. It was very easy to get into her phone. I then went farther and looked through her emails, messages, and even her personal browser history. Still, it was insufficient. I required more. I had to be aware of what they did and where they were at all times. That is when I set up the covert cameras. One tiny one in her car, one larger one in the hidden apartment she rented, the one she believed I was unaware of. The best part about it all was that I wasn't only searching for proof. I was aware of her infidelity beforehand. No, it wasn't our intention to capture them in the act. This has to do with subduing them, seeing them writhe, sowing doubt, and then seeing those seeds sprout into a paranoid garden. As soon as I had access, I began to manipulate their thoughts. It started quietly, with odd texts coming in from unidentified numbers, strange emails implying that something is off. Texts that said something ambiguous like "I see you" or "you can't hide forever" would scare Emma. I would then access Mark's work emails and send private material to his rivals. One by one, his business transactions began to collapse. It eluded him to explain. He failed to halt it. The nicest thing is that they were unaware that it was me. Emma went into paranoia. Every smallest sound would make her jump, and she would always glance over her shoulder and dart her eyes about, as if she were being pursued. Mark was also starting to lose his hold as he saw his company fail and had no idea why. With each day that went by, I did nothing except watch as the tension between them grew. This was more than retaliation. It was artistic. They believed they were in charge, believing there would be no repercussions for them living their little double life. They were being played, and I was the one pulling all the strings, but they were unaware of this. Retaliation's intricacy is in its ability to make people doubt reality to the point where they are unable to believe their own thoughts. That's what I carried out. I dismantled their sense of security piece by piece, slowly and deliberately. Every note, every coincidence, every inexplicable thing that happens. Everything was planned out. What's the finest thing, then? They were clueless as to the perpetrator. Emma gave up the easiest. I began with small things. I would deliver flowers and cards with the message, "I know your secret," to her office. At first, she attempted to brush it off with a chuckle, acting like it was just a joke, but I could see the doubt beginning to emerge in her eyes. Then I started threatening her personal email with odd, cryptic messages. Things like, "He knows, or you think you're safe, but you're not." She started to crumble as the paranoia took hold. She went to bed. The film from the concealed cameras in her flat showed her pacing the living room at 2 a.m. and leaping at every shadow and stream. Persuaded that someone was observing her, she would stare out the window nonstop. She used to constantly check the mirrors of her car, as though she thought someone was following her. I wanted her to experience the same sense of being chased that I did when I learned she was running away from me. Mark came next. It was his career for him. I struck him in the pocketbook, where it stung. I began supplying his rivals in business with anonymous tips, tidbits of knowledge that undermined every transaction he attempted to close. It was nothing that I would be able to retrieve. Just enough to undermine him every step of the way. He would miss out on a big contract one day, and then one of his clients would abruptly and mysteriously pull out of a transaction. His company started to deteriorate gradually, and his confidence suffered more and more with each lost transaction. I increased the pressure after that. I was implying to him in my carefully constructed letters that his hidden affair with Emma was soon to come to light. I was careful to provide information that only him would know. Little reminders that I was constantly observing him, even when he attempted to conceal. He became defensive and anxious. At work, he would argue with coworkers, believing they were trying to harm him. The previously suave and self-assured man had turned into a neurotic mess who would shout at coworkers, lose his temper in meetings, and generally spiral out of control. He and Emma's tension became intolerable. They were meant to be this ideal, discreet little couple. However, the fissures were now visible. They began to argue more and held each other responsible for everything. Mark felt Emma was becoming too reckless and leaving behind proof of their affair, while Emma felt Mark wasn't doing enough to keep them from being found. As I had anticipated, they were betraying one another. I wasn't finished, though. This was only phase 1 of the gaslighting. It was necessary for them to demolish themselves within, to instill mistrust in everything around them as well as in each other. And I would eventually give them the shove they needed to finally collapse. The best part was that they were unaware that it was me. Mark was too preoccupied with attempting to save his collapsing enterprise, and Emma was too absorbed by her guilt. They were unaware that the person they believed they had tricked was the one they should have been watching over their shoulders for. I wanted more than merely to harm them. I wanted them to collapse so completely that there would be no turning back. And there was still the big finale come. They were close to breaking by the time I was ready to prepare the last scene. Emma was jittery, worried, sleep-deprived, and could not stand the shadows. Mark's career was in complete disarray. His commercial agreements were sliding through his fingers like sand, and his reputation was collapsing. Their dread, mistrust, and paranoia had imprisoned them inside their own heads. However, the best was still to come. I knew I had to pull this off in front of everybody. Something magnificent that they were unable to flee from. That's when the concept for the yearly charity event dawned on me. It was flawless. Everyone in our social circle would be there. It was that type of occasion. Influencers, all those whose opinions counted, would be there, all decked up in their best, drinking champagne, chit-chatting about how luxurious their lives were. Emma and Mark would be there. I knew it. They had no choice to them. Looks were everything. I took equal effort to create my invitation as I had the rest of my strategy. I knew they would attend, so I gave them separate invites, of course. They hadn't shown up together because they had been too cautious about hiding their affair. Emma would be there, playing the devoted wife to the best of her abilities, and Mark would show up by himself, stroking the room with his well-honed phony charm. It was far too simple. I dressed appropriately for the banquet that night, but I stayed hidden. I pulled the threads one last time, seeing everything from behind the curtain as it happened. The location was breathtaking. The air was filled with the sound of clinking glasses and laughing, the sparkle of chandeliers overhead, and the heavy smell of costly perfume wafted from the throng. But I didn't give a damn about that. I was staring at the screens. No. As you can see, I had planned something unique. I'd set a small surprise on each of the great ballroom screens. I had a presentation plan that was going to put an end to the evening. Unexpectedly, the gullible public will witness private texts exchanged between Emma and Mark, their tiny secrets exposed to the public eye. I took care to include pictures of their private meetings, too, not just messages. Images of them together in locations they believed would remain hidden forever. The video footage from her car and apartment was all there, just waiting to be discovered. I socialized a little bit during the evening to keep people from suspecting me. However, my attention was fixed on the timer, anticipating the precise instant when the gala's energy would change. Then it took place. The beginning of what should have been an ordinary charity event was indicated by a little dimming of the lights. Rather, the incriminating evidence danced on the displays. The audience let out a collective gasp. As soon as the video started to play, a wave of murmurs started to spread. Text messages between Emma and Mark that were visible to everybody, filled with longing, betrayal, and flotation. Next, the images. They were all worse than the previous, and it was obvious what they had been up to behind my back. I knew how they responded without having to be in close proximity to them. I could see Emma's face being overcome with terror, horror, and embarrassment. Mark as well. In front of every influential person he had ever attempted to impress, his world was collapsing. I had meticulously planned this occasion. Not only was it important to expose them, but it was also important to do it in a way that would be most damaging to the public. A startled stillness descended upon the gathering as attention turned to the humiliated pair. Emma's carefully constructed image and social status were destroyed. Was suddenly the night's laughingstock, his reputation destroyed. This was it, there was no turning back. However, it wasn't the last. With the whispers of the audience becoming a muffled roar and others taking photographs to document the aftermath, Emma stormed out of the room, tears running down her cheeks. Mark trailed after, but not before causing some damage. I had one more strike to deliver. But they were exposed. They were unaware that earlier in the day, I had completely depleted both of their bank accounts. All those well-hidden money they believed they possessed vanished. Transferred to an account I owned overseas. All that remained of them were their damaged reputations and their broken relationships. Not only was I stealing their self-esteem, but I was stealing their lives. They were unable to get away. Not at this moment. I needed to play one more card. While she was preoccupied arranging her next meeting with Mark, I had changed the locks on our house. I packed her things and had them delivered to Mark's small flat. Her opulent lifestyle and her feeling of safety had come to an end. When she decided to betray me, I had eliminated her from my life, just as she had eliminated me from hers. Moreover, regarding Mark, his demise came quickly and violently. No customers, no sales, no money. His business was ruined, and his career was ended. Their idyllic little dream world was suddenly reduced to ashes, contrary to their earlier belief that they could survive there. And me? I vanished into the background, content to see it all come to pass. I wasn't finished, though. The evening had not ended. Not for me, and most definitely not for them. Mark and Emma, the lady I once loved. The guys who believed they could take my life were demoralized, ashamed, and destitute. However, I wasn't going to stop there. There was more to this than just taking their lives. I desired for them to turn on one another and destroy one another until nothing remained. Emma was clueless about where to go. Now that she was barred out of the estate she had so proudly displayed, she was destitute. Of course, she tried phoning me. Crazy as hell. Requesting pardon. However, I had already left. I watched this tragedy's final act unfold from a distance, letting her stew in that terror, alone and defeated. All she had left was Mark's apartment. That tiny, claustrophobic apartment that he hired out to conceal their romance would now be her new home. Her brand new circumstances. Mark, too? He wasn't exactly excited to share his space with the woman who had just pulled him down with her, to put it mildly. Before he could object, she arrived at his door looking disheveled and with tears on her previously immaculate makeup. I picture the exchange. The fault. Emma snapped, accusing him of being entirely to blame and claiming that if he had been more cautious, None of this would have occurred. Mark was angry and dejected as he pointed the finger back at her, claiming that she was careless and that she ought to have terminated things before they got out of hand. Their priceless little romance crumbled under the weight of their mutual devastation as their long simmering tension finally erupted. It was bound to happen. I knew they would blow out on each other when they had nothing left to hold on to. I was familiar with it from business. When things go wrong, partnerships based on deceit and greed seldom last. They would eventually begin to destroy each other, and I had ensured that this would happen sooner rather than later. Seeing them destroy themselves wasn't the really last blow, though. It wasn't even about taking away their assets, their self-esteem, or their power. No, the quiet I left them in was the true death blow. I turned and left them there, not saying a word. No conflict, nothing to explain, nothing. That's the problem about individuals like Emma and Mark, you see. They thrive on conflict, drama, and passion. They anticipate you to yell, scream, and fight. However, they truly begin to fall apart when you simply go, leaving them to sit in the wreckage of their own creation and disappearing from their life like a ghost. Naturally, Emma attempted to contact me. She emailed people. Texts, even made an attempt to show up anywhere she believed I may be. However, I had left. Just as she had erased herself from mine the instant she decided to turn on me, I had erased myself from hers. All that remained for her to deal with was the ruins of her life with Mark, and the realization that she had caused her own destruction. Mark's situation wasn't any better. Everything was lost for him, including his clients, business, and reputation. Even worse than that, though. The image he had laboriously cultivated vanished from him. The affable, prosperous guy who was admired by many had become a shadow, a joke, and a figure whom people discussed in whispers in private. And Emma was left utterly alone as the dust cleared, and she eventually came to the realization that she had ruined her life for a man who wasn't even able to support her in difficult times. I was done having to see them. I didn't have to witness their attempts to put their lives back together or listen to their disagreements. What followed them was not the reason for my retaliation. It was about realizing that they would always be held accountable for their deeds, no matter where they went from here. Whether they broke up in a fit of rage or stayed together out of desperation, they would always bear the consequences of their treachery. What about me? I carried on. However, I didn't completely vanish. I had plenty of money, plenty of resources, and plenty of tranquility right now. Calm, since I had regained authority. Calm, since I'd shown to them that they couldn't fool me. As I had predicted, they ultimately destroyed one another. And I was free to leave the debris behind. Free of the heartache, betrayal, and lies. Liberated from them. I didn't have to turn around. They had reached their conclusion. But me? I had only barely begun. I sincerely appreciate all of your support and for sticking with my YouTube tales, listeners. I appreciate your excitement and input so much. Await more thrilling stories in the future. Best wishes.